to get you. And some of you got kids and grandchildren go to that school. Nothing personal. The schools are doing a great job, but that flooding got to stop.
Yeah, this one was unusual. Thank you.
Thank you, everything.
That's all? Okay. Okay, going on discussion and action item number 7, Municipal Code Amendment MCA 18-002, the Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee. Director Eliano. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As you know, the City of Hemet is one of 18 member agencies for WRCOG, and one of their primary programs is the Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee Program, or TUMF, as we affectionately call it. This has been a regional fee that's in place. It's the same fee throughout all the cities in the county to mitigate the impacts of new development on our circulation network and our regional circulation network. At present, those fees are collected at the local agency level. So, for example, our building department calculates the fees when the plans come in and charges those fees and collects them at the time prior to certificate of occupancy. Then we remit those fees through our finance department to WRCOG monthly, and then they do audits at the end of the year. So as WRCOG over time has determined that through some of the audits that they would really rather calculate the fees themselves as opposed to the member agencies, just to establish more efficiency and consistency. So in October, the executive committee of WRCOG proposed to have the fees instead collected by WRCOG staff as opposed to the cities. And at your October 9th meeting, you indicated to us to communicate to WRCOG that that was our intention to go that direction. So this is the ordinance that would put this in place. This amends our current TUMP fee ordinance and essentially establishes that the calculation and collection of the fee would be directly to WRCOG. So the process they're putting in place, it can be all electronic. They were still submitting plans to us. The building staff would fill out the calculation worksheets with all the information regarding the development. We forward that on to WRCOG. They calculate the fees. They communicate back to the staff, our staff, and to the developer. They're also going to be setting up an electronic fee payment that would be active in July, and they'll give us notification, then we can issue the certificate. One of our initial concerns was time, and we wanted to make sure that this was not going to delay any potential projects or businesses coming into town. And they've committed to that they could do a 48-hour turnaround for any of those calculations, and generally we would submit it early enough to where that should allow for plenty of time to be able to get their C of O. There's also an appeals process, as there is currently, so if there is any disagreement in terms of the calculation of fees, there's a system in place for that. The benefits that we see to the City of Hemet would be that, one, it reduces a tremendous amount of workload that the city is currently doing right now, in addition to not only the building staff, but the finance staff, and for the annual audits. It also shifts the burden of any miscalculation to WRCOG as opposed to the local agencies. Right now, we would be responsible for that. Of the 18 agencies, 10 have already adopted the new ordinance, and 4 are in the same process that we are in terms of pushing this forward this month. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. It is an alternative. If the city elects to continue the process as it currently is, you have the opportunity to be able to do that and not adopt the ordinance. However, WRCOG will be, for those agencies, requiring more information to be submitted and more auditing. So in terms of a impact to the agency, we really think adoption of the ordinance would be our recommendation. Council, have any questions?
Not really a question, just an observation. You know, I'm always an advocate of working smarter and not harder, and this is really one of the additional benefits of being a member agency of an organization like WRCOG. Makes perfectly good sense to me if it's going to free up staff time, and they're going to be accountable for the auditing and any calculation errors. That lifts a tremendous burden off of our staff, and they can be applying their time to things that only our staff can deal with, and allow WRCOG to take this on. So
I would agree. Thank
happy
you.
to see it on the agenda.
Also, and I failed to mention it, but it's in the staff report, we already have a similar process with the school district and with the MWD, to where they calculate the fees and notify us, and then we issue the permits.
Anyone else? Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Hearing none. Our city manager does.
It also removes the potential of what happened with the city of Beaumont when the dump funds went to the consultants instead of the COG. And so it's a good protection built in for the whole process.
Okay, with that, oh, did you have something to add? Okay, with that, I'd like a motion. Oh, yes. Do we have a motion?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Please vote. And that passes 5-0. Sarah, please read the ordinance title.
Ordinance Bill Number 19-014, an ordinance of the City Council, the City of Hemet, amending Chapter 58, Article 3, Division 2 of the Hemet Municipal Code to include a process for WRCOG calculation and collection of fees under the Western Riverside County Transportation Uniform Mitigation Fee Program.
Thank you. Now we go on to item number 8, Accelerated Retrofit Program, Brubaker Park. And before you do your city attorney, would you please clarify the reason why it is not a conflict of interest for me to discuss or vote on this issue?
Even though you're employed with EMWD, the Political Reform Act and the FPPC regulations state that government salary in and of itself does not create a conflict of interest. You have no other financial interest in this particular transaction. You're not a supplier of the materials. You're not an owner of the park. You don't receive interest, fees, or gifts related to this. So under the California Political Reform Act and FPPC regs, there is no financial interest. It's not material. You're able to vote under the law.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Jensen.
A little mood lighting. Good evening, Mayor Wright and members of council. As you are very familiar with, we are going to talk once again tonight about the Accelerated Retrofit Program for Brubaker Park. The park itself as you know, is owned by the City of Hemet. It's located on the corner of Mustang and Costin in the southwest part of our city. The park is about 60 acres in size, and it falls within the water service area of Eastern Municipal Water District. Just to give you, kind of recap the background that we've kind of discussed in a lot of detail. The city and Eastern, when the park was initially beginning to be developed in the mid-90s, Eastern partnered with the city and kind of worked with us in terms of establishing a water supply for the park. And there was actually a water supply agreement that was put together that took into account some of the special rates and other things that were happening at the time with the agencies. The agreement itself established a temporary water supply to the park, which was potable water, groundwater, that was intended to supply the park until such time that the recycled water lines would be made available to connect to. So over the course of the years of this agreement, it's been a couple of decades, we've had multiple addendums that have expanded the agreement as we've built more fields at the park. The agreement itself has language and terms in it that deferred initially the connection fees for the city of Hemet, connection fees that are normally charged by any water agencies when you're establishing new water services. The agreement also established a commitment from the city to, upon notification from Eastern of the availability of recycled water infrastructure near the park, the city had committed to go ahead and transition to recycled water for the irrigation of the park. Again, a responsible way to take care of our groundwater basin, as well as look at alternatives to irrigating with a source that isn't quite maybe as valuable or costly as groundwater can be. So ultimately, we talked about previous council meetings in both November and December. We had discussions about the program that Eastern offers to fund this type of a retrofit project. And basically coming out of the agreement, the agreement kind of established two options for us. One was transition over to recycled water, and if we opted not to do that, then our only other option was really looking at paying the potable rate, the groundwater rate, and switching over to that rate in the event that the council did opt not to go to the recycled water. So where are we today? The previous water supply agreement has expired, along with the special rate that we have been receiving. If you recall, we were receiving a pretty low rate for just getting water that we already owned wheeled to us at a very reduced rate that was tied to an agreement that even preceded or was prior to the water supply agreement itself. The recycled water infrastructure is now available for connection to the park. If you're looking at the, oh, that wasn't good, Chris. Okay, hold on. This guy. So I realize this is a small map, but here's kind of the location of the park that you're looking at. The water, the recycled water line reach that we're looking at coming off of is right here, which is on Sanderson Avenue. And we've actually been working with Eastern since about 2005, talking about this recycled system that they've been building. And it was in about 2017 that we really got kind of our notification that the system was ready for us to move forward. They had tanks in place, they had the capacity, the volume in place of the recycled water. Everything was ready for us, as well as, at the time, the high school, to go ahead and move on to recycled water. The program that we've been talking about is the Accelerated Retrofit Program. EMWD offers the program as a funding source. It's an upfront, interest-free funding to cover the costs for construction of transition to recycled water. The program itself, through Eastern, is about a $4.7 million program. There are a number of projects with many different agencies that are taking advantage of this funding. And while there's a lot more detail in the attachments, I attached the last staff report to this staff report to not be real repetitive, but just kind of some quick hits about that program. Remember, what it allows us to do is go ahead and do the construction. We're reimbursed for those costs by Eastern, and then we repay that money, essentially zero interest, over the course of 12 years through an adjusted potable rate. So rather than being charged the high potable rate or be charged just simply the recycled rate, we're being charged at an adjusted rate that's in the middle at 75% of the potable rate. The program itself looks at that repayment over a 12-year period. The actual language is up to 12 years. There's potential for that payment not to occur for the full 12 years. EMWD looks at the repayment not project by project, but as a program whole. So depending on how quickly others take advantage of it and the funding's restored, we might have a shorter time period than that we're repaying back. The city has been awarded $197,175 for our project at Brubaker Park. This amount was initially lower. We did go out for competitive bid and found that the bids came back a little bit higher than the original amount that we were afforded through the program. And so Eastern did take a look at our project, and back in, I believe, September, took it back to their board and requested additional funding for our project. So as of today, we currently sit authorized for $197,000 and some change. The construction bids. So we did do a competitive bid process last August. The bids closed on the 22nd. So we do have a low bidder. We've gone through all of the process of doing all of the reference checks, and they have been gracious enough to hold their pricing for 6 months while we've been working through these different processes. So that at this point is ready to go. And then ultimately, this is the third time that we've discussed this item at council. There have been some inquiries, and rightfully so, some great questions asked about some previous agreements, and so we've had some follow-up to do. So today, we're actually back in response to the direction of council from December 11th, when they requested that the city manager contact Eastern Municipal Water District and just make sure that there aren't any other options that we were missing in terms of evaluating whether or not we were going to retrofit to recycled water. So what we are going to do now is look at those options. So there's a lot of information, there's a lot of numbers, so we'll try to go through this kind of systematically here. So option A is really the option that we've been bringing forward as staff recommendation all along, and that is to retrofit Brubaker Park to recycled water. So when you're looking at the columns, you can see we've got, obviously, option A. The water source for option A is recycled water. We talked about the fact that there is this adjusted program rate, if you will, the ARP program rate, that we would be paying for our water per acre foot at the park for the repayment period of the program. That rate would then drop after the repayment was done to a rate of $520 per acre foot. So ultimately, when you're looking at the annual cost of this option, we would be looking at paying about $19,000 a year during the repayment period, and then that would be reduced to somewhere around 13.5, 13.6, 13.7 thereafter, a year thereafter, for recycled water provision. The kind of the outlier in all of these options are these connection fees, and these are a one-time fee. So in terms of option A and going with the recycled water transition, we would be left with our contractual obligation from our water supply agreement we had with Eastern to cover the connection cost of what would be the one remaining potable meter at the site. The transition to recycled water will get rid of the other meter, and the cost of putting the recycled water meter in is encapsulated in that project cost of $197. So we would really have kind of just this one-time payment under this option for about just under $11,000, $10,734. One of the parts of the discussion that we had with Eastern Municipal Water District was in terms of this option and the ARP program, that we would be able to absorb that $10,000 cost in with our program repayment. So it doesn't increase the amount here that we would be paying, but they would just go ahead and look at that essentially as part of the transition program. So that would kind of be folded in. As we discuss these options, keep in mind Brubaker Park is a general fund supported park. So when we're talking dollars here on any of these, we're talking general fund dollars. Option B then is, wow, I'm getting two computers with that one. Option B is basically we would not transition to recycled water, and we would simply become an Eastern Municipal Water District potable water customer. So there wouldn't be any construction that would happen. There wouldn't be any change. What would happen is the rate, because remember our old agreement and our special rates are expired, they're done. Our rate would then move to this $963 per acre foot rate. And so in terms of what that would look like as a cost annually, we use about a little over 26 acre feet a year on average. So when you multiply these different rates out, that's the acre feet number we're using. So for option B, we're looking at about a $25,000 cost annually for water services. Now, the difference here is that we would still be responsible to reimburse Eastern for the connection fees related to the 2 meters that will stay in place. And so that one-time cost for those connection fees in today's dollars is $114,532. So that would be a one-time general fund expense. So coming into these conversations with Eastern, those were kind of the two options that we had on the table. We talked about some fun ways we thought we might be able to do it during the council meetings. But ultimately, when we looked at what our realistic third option would be essentially to continue to have city water wheeled to the park. Now, that is what is happening now under an old agreement with a special rate that is gone. So option 3, to continue that, what would happen is we would really be looking at having that same type of service, but we would need to apply today's costs to it. And so the rate that you see here includes the cost of water that the city buys and currently puts into recharge, the cost for delivery of that water into the ground through our facilities that we have and that we share with Eastern, the cost for Eastern to extract that water out of the ground and then also wheel it to us. And so when you look at that, the per acre foot cost with those elements in it is over $1,000 an acre foot. So kind of continuing on with the formula, that would mean approximately a little over $29,000 a year for water service costs. And then we would still have this connection fee piece of the puzzle that we would be responsible to go ahead and close out with Eastern. So ultimately, looking at this kind of big picture, staff still recommends that option A, the transition to recycled water, be considered by council. It's the most economically feasible for us. I've just listed some of the benefits of this option. We obviously close out the contractual obligations of the previous agreement. We have transitioned to recycled water. We've handled our connection fees, and we basically close that agreement out. The long-term annual cost of the recycled water supply. So I'm going to go back just real quick. If we look at the option A, so this is the payback rate that we're going to pay for the period, but then we're going to drop down to whatever the recycled water rate is at that time. And using today's rates, we would be looking at paying, once we're out of the repayment of the program, again, about $13,680 a year versus $25,000 or $29,000 through the other options annually. So we're really looking at a savings of over half of what we would be paying if we became a potable customer or if we wheeled our own water to us. Let me correct that. If Eastern wheeled our water to us. So, and then additional benefits, and we've talked about these already. The reduction in groundwater use protects the groundwater basin. It helps with water quality. It helps with supply needs in the future. The other question that had come up was what happens to the water then that we're not wheeling to the park? Well, what happens is that we still own that water. So our carryover account that we've talked about multiple times that we have through the Water Master Agreement and the Groundwater Management Plan, we just gain those acre feet of water back into that account. They're still ours. We still have the capacity to use it when we need to and where we need to. And then finally, choosing to transition to recycled water, we're able to take advantage of the ARP program and fund the cost of the project without a kind of a one-time shocking use of general fund monies. We're kind of able to smooth that payment over a number of years with the opportunity that Eastern has provided through the adjusted rate with the program. I've talked a lot, but I have one more slide. So ultimately, the recommended action, if council chooses to support option A, which is staff's recommendation, would be to approve participation in the EMWD accelerated retrofit program to transfer the park and the baseball fields to recycled water for irrigation. We're asking that you would authorize the city manager to execute an agreement for recycled water retrofit funding between EMWD and the city for an amount up to $197,195. Let me just sidebar here. We actually had found a couple of incorrect numbers in the agreement that was attached to the staff report. So part of what I've provided you is an updated and corrected copy of attachment A, which is this agreement that we're talking about in action item 2. The third action we would like you to take would be to authorize our finance director to record a supplemental appropriation and the amount of the project budget, and also record an increase in the revenue projections, because obviously as part of the program we're going to get that reimbursement in as revenue, and do that in the amount of the retrofit funding in the Parks Fund. And then lastly, authorize the city manager to approve any purchase orders or other documents that we might need signed in support of the project. And with that, I'm happy to field any questions.
Are there any members of the public that wish to speak on this item? Hearing none, are there any council members that have comments or questions?
I'll start because I know she's going to take a long time. Thank you for this more in-depth explanation, because last time when this came to council, one of the reasons why I voted no was because there was unanswered questions about cost and longevity of this and how much it's going to cost over the long term. So thank you for the explanation. When I look at the numbers that are on here, I do see a significant savings if we were to do doing nothing. And one of the things that I really enjoyed hearing was that this was an interest-free allocation from Eastern to help pay for this, that we repaid it back interest-free. So I like interest-free. That's good. Unless it's our money that we're trying to earn interest on.
Right, right.
Let me just make that clear. So, but thank you for that, and thank you for the clarification on this. I just wanted to get that out before Councilmember Meyer starts.
And if I may, I just want to recognize both Joe Mawad, Assistant General Manager from Eastern, as well as John Worth, who is the Recycled Water Program Analyst. I think I made him a manager or a captain earlier when I was talking to him.
Well, he does the work of a manager.
But yes. So they were very helpful and very generous with their time as we worked through talking through some of the options. So thank you.
Just a couple questions, and I thank you too for this in-depth comparison of costs. In going to the recycled water for Brubaker, we will still be maintaining a potable water connection. Is that correct?
Correct. So there will be we obviously have a snack bar there. We have drinking fountains. And we kind of talked about this the other day, over the years as different plans have come through and different changes have been made, the system's pretty complicated, I'll say. So one of the things that we're looking to do is go ahead and, rather than trying to kind of cut things off where they go. We're actually going to put a new line in for the potable, for the drinking fountains, and then obviously the separate construction for the recycled water. And something I forgot to mention is that because we're doing the work, I don't know if council, any of you or any members of the public have seen the bottle fill stations. We are going to be putting one of those in, courtesy of Eastern, at the snack bar. So we'll have that rather than your standard drinking fountain. So that bonus for us too. So
Very good. Glad to hear that. The other question on that is, will we be able to get additional conservation credits through DWR with the state of California when they start imposing water conservation on us again?
So we'll have to talk about that, but my off-the-cuff answer, my assumption, is that because this is Eastern's water district area, it's not going to be necessarily a credit for Hemet. If they look at what we've done at the park sites and where we have done the retrofit to recycled water, then yes, but I'm not sure exactly kind of what the criteria is in terms of getting those credits. My first guess would be that Eastern would be able to show that as a non-potable use.
Okay. Us saving our 26.3 square acre feet a year, will that show as a credit?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's water in the bank, if you will.
That would be a reduction
So,
for us in total
right.
consumption.
Right.
Okay, then my other comment and question is on the updated attachment A that we just got today
Okay.
on subparagraph 11.1 on notice. It says that notice payment instrument required blah, 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 to go to the post office. EMWD's address is correct, but City of Hemet, I don't think they have an
That is
office
a
at 3707.
fancy address for West Valley High School. We will get that corrected.
Thank you, unless West Valley wants to pay for this.
Well, wait. Thank you.
You are welcome. And other than that, thank you for a very thorough staff report, and really appreciate the extra work you have done, and thank you to Eastern for contributing assistance on this also. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is it too late to ask a question? I just saw one.
Let us get through our council. Michael, you had another question?
I did. I do have another question, and this might be better suited for Eastern. They might be able to chime in on this one. The updated line for recycled water that's on Sanderson Avenue, is the school, West Valley, already on that, connected to that, and are they already watering their fields, their ball fields?
Yes.
With that water?
Yes. Their
So
ball
are we gonna
fields as
tap
well as
into
their
what
landscape.
Their line that's already, if they've got water, I asked the question because if they've already got recycled water at the ball fields, are we going to tap into that, or are we going to go all the way back to the main?
I believe that we'll have our own main that'll be coming off of Sanderson, pressure-wise, so that we've got what we need to irrigate the park. So
It's too bad the school district didn't make their pipe bigger so we could have just connected to that. That could have saved some money.
well, their address is still on here, so maybe we can.
So we're going to send them to that. All right, very good. Thank you.
Russ?
Yeah, and this is maybe somewhat of a moot point, but just out of curiosity, do we know what the potable water source is? Is it Eastern water right now, or is it well water?
So right now it's essentially city water, because we're having our water wheeled to us graciously at a very old rate that again has come to an end. So if you're talking about where did the molecules come from, it's groundwater.
I think the essence of my question is that we have so many of our city-owned wells that are not in service currently. So hypothetically, this could have a favorable impact on that demand if that is where the potable water is coming from.
It is not coming from our city system. So the water that we are receiving even today is the water that we have recharged into the San Jacinto River Basin. So we're getting essentially our imported water, our Saboba water at that park.
Okay. Well, I concur with the comments already made that appreciate the extra time and extra information that this staff report has been able to provide to us for tonight's discussion. And I just have one quick comment about Mike's comment about the interest. Reminds me of my grandfather saying, how you stand on an issue depends on where you sit.
That's true. Carly?
Okay, so on the contract, page 3, when it says, let's see, our current rate is going to be $722.01 per acre foot.
Correct.
Right? And maybe we can verify with EMWD since they're here. But that rate is going to be adjusted as water rates adjust. So if we have more water, so annually when they post your rates, then that amount will be on the scale. Okay, great. And then would that also be true for the 520.15 afterwards?
Yes,
Right?
for the cycled
So-
water rate as well, yes.
Okay.
So as there are escalation of rates, those amounts will change as
And I'm
well.
just saying, like, in 13 years, when our recycle rate is not $13,000, it's going to be because of inflation or whatever the current rate is at the time.
Correct.
Now, here's another tricky question. I forgot to ask you this
Uh-oh.
earlier, but it's okay. I'm
Let's
sure you have
do
the
it.
answer. So the potable water that we are still going to have for the snack bar, bathrooms, drinking fountains, is that going to be wheeled from us? Are we wheeling that in, or are we just going to be EMWD customers?
It would be more beneficial, it would be more cost effective, thank you, to just use the EMWD purple rate. Yeah, because if you recall, we're looking at $963 an acre foot versus over $1,000 an acre foot in terms of cost. So,
Sure, I cover all the bases.
right,
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
for that report and making that way more clear.
thanks.
Did you want to go up and, you're going to have to go up to the podium and give your name, please.
My question was just if the toilets will be changed to where they'll be flushed with recycled water, because that's a huge water saving.
I'm going to answer that question.
I will. I love questions about toilets. So the potable system actually will serve the snack bar as well as that entire facility. So unfortunately, no, the system won't be using recycled water for that, but duly noted. But I do know that that would take a lot more work in terms of tearing the building apart and internal piping to make that happen, as well as potentially even different style facilities, if you will, because of the
You just go to the pipe, you don't have to go underneath the building or
You can't talk from the seat, please.
well, and when you're looking at that, if that potable water is connected to everything, including dishes and everything, just going to the pipe in a looped system doesn't solve that problem. So maybe future project. There you go.
Okay, city manager, did you have anything to add?
She did a great job.
Okay, yes, you did.
Yay,
Thank you for that. With that, do we have a motion?
I will move approval.
Second.
Please vote. And that passes 5-0.
Thank you, council.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Next item, amendment to fiscal year 2018-19 budget and second quarter update. Director Rocha.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm here tonight to present the second quarter financial update as well as the mid-year review and ask for a small amendment to the fiscal year 18-19 budget. So for the general fund, non-Measure U revenues are on track for this time of year, and they're at just under 30%. So reminder, property taxes haven't, as of this date, had not started coming in. This is as of December 31st. We did start seeing payments in January, so big difference now. Same thing with sales tax. It is always delayed. Non-Measure U expenditures are on track for the year. They're at 51%, and we were at the halfway mark there, so they're right on track. Measure U revenues are at 29%, and they're based on sales tax, so they're going to be delayed. Measure U expenditures are at 36%. For some of the taxes that we do collect in the general fund, if you recall, the transient occupancy taxes for fiscal year 17-18 were budgeted at $850,000. We did see a large increase last year, so I increased the projection for fiscal year 18-19 to $1 million, and we are exactly at 50%. So we are tracking much higher in TOT tax, or transient occupancy taxes from the hotels. Property taxes, again, as of the second quarter, most of those have not been collected. A few things had come in, not a whole lot to report, though, as of December 31st. Sales tax collections for this time of year are slightly higher than last year, and that's mainly due to new software that was implemented for reporting and paying taxes for the businesses to report. Last year, a lot of payments were delayed, so last year we saw less in revenues at the end of the year. They have come in. HDL tells us most, if not all of that, has now been collected, so we are tracking a little higher than last year. And for business license renewals, even though this report was as of December 31st, and renewals aren't due until January 31st, we had already collected 60%. As of January of this year, we had already collected about 90% of our business license renewals, so we're not seeing a whole lot of delinquencies in that. For non-tax related revenues, but still general fund, the library's literacy grant was awarded for $3,000 above the projection, so they'll have a little bit more to work with as far as their literacy program. Passport processing fees are about 61% of the budget. And in community development, we are seeing an increase in permits. Most of our permit fees as of December 31st are at nearly 60% of projected revenues. Some are a little lower, some are a little higher, but overall, they're at about 60% at mid-year. On the expenditure side, if you recall, during the budget process, the budget that was approved by council called for a $1 million savings in salaries. So through the end of the second quarter, most of the departments are under budget. We did budget those within the line items, so when I tell you that we're at 51% expenditure, that is taking that into account already. There's still several vacancies within the general fund departments that will continue to generate savings throughout the year. Some of them will not be filled before the year end. Some of them will be, but it's a long process. It's delayed, so we'll still see a lot of savings from that. So again, 51%, including that $1 million in salary savings. On the Measure U side, expenditures for police are at 37% for the year. For fire, 35%. Both of those, really looking at the budget, they still have vacancies that they haven't filled, and they have equipment budgeted or services budgeted that they have not used, so that's why they're tracking lower than they would be for this time of year. For the non-general fund budget or departments, revenues are outpacing expenditures in most of the funds. Lighting and landscape revenues, you don't really see anything in there, and that's, again, they come in with the property taxes. We hadn't started seeing those payments yet. The water fund has only spent about 23% of its budget. They do have a lot of projects that are already committed, already budgeted, but have not been started yet. So that's why they're only at 23%. On the revenue side for water, they're at just over 50% though. So we are on track to collect what we're supposed to be collecting for water revenues. So if you have any questions about the second quarter update, I can answer those before we go into mid-year, or I can just continue.
Based on what you're seeing now with revenues that have come in, are you seeing a trend that we're going to trend higher or lower from previous year as far as both Measure U and regular sales tax?
Sales tax? It looks like we are going to trend higher, but again, the numbers are skewed because there's so many payments that are delayed. There were several payments that were delayed last year. It's hard to know how much of that increase is real sales tax increase versus those delayed payments.
So would that be a more appropriate question to ask at the next?
Yes, I can work with HDL to get a breakdown. I think they do have a breakdown of what are the amounts of the delayed payments so that I can take that out of the equation and compare where we're really at.
All right, thank you.
On the issue of taxes,
Yes.
for the gas tax and SB1 funding, is that coming in at this point, or is that it is?
Yes, it
coming
is.
in per the expectation and estimates that came down from the state?
I have the spreadsheet. If you give me just a second,
Okay.
I'll pull it up. It was in the attached to the agenda. Gas tax was at 41% collected. That one, gas tax comes in about 1 month delayed, so that would be normal. And these particular revenues do include the SB1 funds as well.
Okay.
So it looks like we are on track for those.
Let me address Michael's question to a degree. We are projecting at the end of this year, she is projecting at the end of this year a surplus in Measure U of about $6.5 million. So they are not spending at the rate of the money coming in. So, and we start over next year with another 11 million.
But isn't that due to the fact that they haven't been able to recruit the amount of officers or firefighters that were a part of that
That's
program?
part of it.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think it's probably a big part of it.
It's actually a two-part. Part of it is not being able to recruit. They do
Right.
have the vacancies, but both chiefs have intentionally budgeted less than the revenue projections to spend. So I am projecting $11.2 million in revenues coming in. They budgeted $9.2 million to spend. And part of that is their long-term plan to set money aside to keep them going in the last 5 or 6 years, right, of the program.
Are there any other questions?
So you're saying long-term, the long-term plan, they have savings because they're saving, and we have extra because we brought in extra.
Their savings because they're budgeting for savings to keep them going in the last few years of the 10-year Measure U plan. And their savings because they're not spending what they're projecting to spend because of the vacancies. And when this whole program was even started, when it was all talked about, HDL had given us estimates and they projected $10 million a year. That hasn't been the case. We brought in about $10.5 million last year. I'm projecting 11.2 this year. I'm pretty confident that it'll happen. So
So the first 2
We're
years
getting
will
more.
be close to $2 million extra.
Well, in the first 2 years of it, we already have 6 million.
Right, but I'm saying.
Left over.
Set aside.
Oh, yeah,
the 10 that
extra,
we
yes,
budgeted
I'm sorry.
Over the 10.
Yes,
So
A mil-
almost $2
about a-
million over the 10 that we thought we would get.
yes,
Just almost $2 million.
correct.
Just wanted to say that a few times.
Almost 2 million.
Thank you. Would either of the chiefs like to speak to this item at this time? Yeah, if you're not prepared to do so, that's okay.
Just briefly on, originally, the finance director, Joy Campfield, was here. She built us a projection that went out past the 10 years. The reality is that we don't want to hire a bunch of employees and then at the 10 years have the tax go away and have nothing left to pay for it. So that was the thinking behind trying to budget under rather than trying to budget right on. Makes no sense to do it that other way. So we're trying to be fiscally prudent. It's one of those things that, we have to balance. We don't have a bunch of extra money there, but we do have some serious capital projects that are coming up that we've been working with the city manager over. So we have some things in the wings that we're looking at, but that's the reality, is that we are trying to look to the future, not just to tomorrow. So.
I assume that was the case, but
Yes, ma'am.
I thought that it would be best that you address that.
Yeah, the only thing I will add, Mayor and members of the council, are the long-term capital projects that have been deferred. So the first 2 years of our effort have been to recruit, and a large part of that effort the last 2 years is to fill the vacancies that are existing. And now we're starting to look forward towards the capital improvements, deferred maintenance, and those longer-term costs. I would echo the police chief's position. As you know, fiscal sustainability has been our key. Thank you.
I think it needs to be pointed out that the raises to the police and fire were taken from the general fund and not from Measure U. And so as a result, there's a corresponding drain on the general fund while Measure U looks very healthy.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from council so far? Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
no, go ahead.
okay. For 18-19 mid-year review, again, council approved a budget for fiscal year 18-19 that was a balanced budget. It includes several cost-saving measures. One of them was the $1 million in savings from vacancies. We had some deferred maintenance that was put off. We used some fund balances in some of the internal service funds to close part of that gap. So with that in mind, there's really very little room within the general fund to do any additional projects or anything like that. So what we're bringing forward tonight is really things that are just kind of cleanup matter, things that need to be put on the budget so that our budget reflects what we are authorized to spend. The departments continue to monitor their budgets to ensure that spending limits are met. When they do have needs that come up that were unforeseen, they're directed to look within their line items to see if they might have savings in other line items to offset those costs. And that's what most of this has been. But one of the projects that we were asked to bring forward is that the city manager's office is working to update the city's website. As you know, our website is sorely outdated. They're doing this in an effort to make it more user-friendly, have better information for our citizens, our employees, and any other people that need to use it. We do have some additional funding available through the Beyond grant from WRCOG, so this would not affect the fund balance at all. The grant would cover the entire amount of the $21,375 for this.
I have a question on that project.
Yes.
I don't need all the details of this, but will that alleviate some of the pressure off of our city clerk if documents were more easily accessed on our website? Because I feel like I have to bug her for things, and when if I could just look them up. I think that every single time.
I think it would depend on what kind of documents.
I'm just one person, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think it would really depend on what kind of documents you're looking for.
Everything is usually public because we've talked about them, so
Right.
you can't just find them.
There are,
Hopefully that would be the case.
there are programs and not necessarily related to the website that helps manage documents and helps manage public records requests. That is something that we've talked about in the past during the budget process. There just hasn't been the funding for it, but we all see the need for that. The next item on the list is really just a cleanup item. The increases that the police and fire departments were entitled to based on sales tax growth for fiscal year 18-19 weren't originally projected in the budget. Now we're coming forward and asking you for authorization to amend the budget to put those line items in. It's about $300,000, and this would really just right-size the budget. The two line items for police and fire non-Measure U would have to come out of fund balance. The police and fire Measure U portion of it, which is about $76,000, would come from Measure U fund balance.
I have another question. So we are still segregating employees?
Yes, we are.
Excellent.
And then the last item we have, again, is another just cleanup house kind of things we need to keep going. IT is working on an RFP to replace our Blade server or our storage system for data and for our network at City Hall. But until that process is completed, we need a 1-year extension on the software license for our existing Blade server and the warranty on the hardware that we have in place, just to keep us protected until he can get through that, until IT and purchasing can get through that process and get the Blade server replaced. We have had it for about 6 years, so it is time to replace it. IT does have fund balance available to use toward that. It's $32,000. They do have fund balance. The balance of that money is to be used for the Blade server replacement when the time comes.
And how long will that replacement take?
Scott? Sorry, I don't have that answer.
That's okay.
Replacement of hardware takes about 6 months. So we're looking to get the RFP out. We imagine that would take probably about 2 months, 30 to 60 days to get responses back. So total time we're looking at would be about 8 months. So that's why we're moving forward with 1 year of additional warranty and software license.
And the way things move, it's probably closer to a year. Okay. Thank you, Michael.
I'll challenge you, Scott, like I challenged the fire chief, get it done in 4 months.
I'll push them.
Thank you, Scott. And on the revenue side, because we are in February, and as I was preparing this, I was looking at what we've collected year to date, not so much just through December. So looking at the various line items where I did see a little bit of growth that should be right-sized in our revenue projections is in property taxes. 2 line items specifically, RPTTF, which is hard to explain, but it's like a residual payment that comes to the city, and it has to do with the dissolution of RDA. So when RDA went away, the city started getting a small payment. We have about $750,000 projected. We got our first payment in January, and it was higher than we expected. So I'm asking to increase the revenue projection by $150,000 in that line item. The unsecured taxes, and those are taxes on like personal property or business equipment, things like that. So it's not backed by real estate. It's more like equipment. If you have like a